Well, welcome. My name is Bruce Whitworth, and I'm a member of the board of the Lewis and Clark Library Foundation, and we're glad to have you here this evening. Should be a fun night. A lot of wonderful folks here and share some fun readings with you. Welcome to Helena Reads Poetry. This is one of the many events that is produced by the Library Foundation every year. And the Library Foundation exists to help raise a little bit of money for the library to help expand the capacity of the library and to help make our great library even better. So we're glad to have you here. We would encourage you to support the library in that way if you so choose. Always like to ask people to provide a gift if you can to the Library Foundation. You'll see it transformed into things like you see out in the lobby here. The printer out there was purchased by the Library Foundation for the library as a result of gifts from all of you folks. So I'd like to thank the board of the library. Our chair is here, Opal Weinbrenner. Patty Gorman is Library Foundation staff, and of course I want to thank John Finn and his remarkable staff here at the Lewis and Clark Library. So I want to give them all a hand. The Library Foundation sponsors Helena Reads Poetry to bring together readers from all across the community to share their selections and have a little bit of fun here in the library. I won't read all of the bios that are in the program. I hope you all got a little program, but I would encourage you to read those because there's some good stuff in there. You're going to learn a lot about these great folks that are with us tonight, and it's quite a wonderful group, and I want to thank them. So let's get started. You don't need to hear much from me. And so I want to start with Bill Borneman. Bill is a bookseller. Bedrock Books is located up on Rodney Street and is an online source for used books. Bill is a musician, writer of poetry and prose, and a book angel. Bill has an original poem for us tonight. So Bill,
Thank you very much. I'm going to read a fairly recent piece I started a few months ago, add on to it every now and then. It's called The Metaphysics of Monotony. Each morning we are beckoned to ascend the mountain of responsibilities arrayed before us. The monotony of gravity, monotony of endless space, empty or scattered with a few lonely stars, each speeding away from the others as rapidly as possible. The monotony of not knowing, of being all too aware. The mind-numbing monotony of necessity. The exhilarating monotony of anything goes. Consider metempsychosis, the same immortal soul journeying from one body to another, life after life after life. Yes, it gets old. After a while, even the immortal soul finally gets tired and thinks, I'll just take a little nap. Immortal soul naps can go on for billions of years. One day, you wake up as a cat or a goat or an ant, and you're on the road again, like Willie Nelson in his interstellar tour bus. The monotony of the streams of living consciousness. The monotony of Joyce's Ulysses. The monotony of doing the dishes. There are entire forms of art built on monotony. Consider the limerick, knock-knock jokes, minimalism in art and music, the card game called War, the real-world games of war and peace, all monotonous as hell, as unchanging as heaven. The monotony of Minot, North Dakota. The monotony of all the Dakotas, north, south, east, and west. Although I've seen sunsets in the southern part of the northwestern corner of South Dakota that are imprinted on my mind forever, backed up in the blockchain of my personal identity. kid. We live in a box that has no bottom. The sides and top are missing as well. Makes it easy to think these monotonous thoughts. The monotony of lobotomy, the melancholy joy we feel when the joys, these joyless banalities called galaxies, pass like billboards along the interstate of universal consciousness. The monotony of the self-explanatory, the monotony of inscrutable instructions, the monotony of on the one hand and then on the other, the monotony of putting your hands in the air when no one cares, the monotony of Mozart, the monotony of Bach, the monotony of all art of any type. You go to a show thinking this is going to be different. This time will be new, fresh, and exciting. Then you see, no, it is not. It is more of the same. More monotony, as though we did not already have all the monotony we could ever need. The monotony of exasperation. The monotony of remaining calm. The monotony of the thinker, his hand resting in his palm, his head resting in his palm. Sedimentary monotony of geology, which leads to uniformitarianism. Was there ever a more monotonous name for a scientific theory than that? And following the monotony of uniformitarianism comes the monotony of catastrophism. All things remain the same, or all things change all at once. What's the difference? If I could tell you, I would let you know. So many monotonouses in so few unmonotonous ways. There is no way around monotony. It is a wall you cannot get on the other side of. A monotheistic monotony of infinite dimensions and innumerable gods. The monotony of absolutes, the monotony of proofs, the monotony of do the math. As Gottfried Leibniz himself said, the mind has a lot more interesting things to do than long division. Monotony of Mondays, of all 8 days of the week. The monotony of weekend benders, monotony of hangovers, do-overs, and madcap revelries under the covers, each in its monotonous round of repetition. The monotony of infinity, the monotony of spiky, harsh sound of all silences, simultaneously amplified into one enormous noiselessness. Sure, it sounds good for a while, but soon we find ourselves invoking the M word and screaming, "Turn off the silence of these infinite spaces." The monotony of the never-changing news. Zen in the art of monotony. Chopping wood, boring. Carrying water, tedious. The ceremonial monotony of tea. Monastic monotony. Whistling a liturgical tune while you work along with your brother inmates on the chain gang of universal salvation for all living entities. The monotony of all the time before you came into being. The monotony of your 9 months in the womb. The monotony of the postnatal world. Then the ultimate monotony of death everlasting. The gigantic little joke that never manages to make it to a punchline. The monotony of waking life, the monotony of falling asleep, of failing to fall from monotonous waking consciousness into monotonous sleeping sleep, the monotony of one more cup of coffee, the monotony of the last best place to have a piece of pie. The monotony of listening, of not paying attention, the monotony of confusion, the monotony of total lucidity, the monotony of the philosophy of monotony. Is monotony better than death? We do not live, do we? We do live in the age of monotony. Without monotony, there is no difference. Here we celebrate the same old school hip-hop, the Shadrach, Meshach, and the Kimbo lingo. How low can you go? Do the limbo. The monotony of verses, versus, verses. All is monotony, and to derail monotony is insurrectional railroadery. The monotony of nothing, the monotony of everything. In monotony begins responsibilities. The monotony of the moon, the stars, the planets, monotony of days and nights and blankets. We are beckoned to ascend the mountain of monotony, just as we are called by the descent of the stream's declivity. One never tires of watching the waves of the waters. It is like nirvana, but without the boredom, like Satori, lacking the disappointment, like salvation without the pain of crucifixion, like samadhi without the annoying chanting and droning. Monotony of sobriety, monotony of inebriation, monotony of making note of every monotonous difference. The monotony of sorting M&Ms, the monotony of sing-alongs, the monotony of monotonouses. Never buy a book that promises you an end to the monotony of life. The key to ending the monotony of existence is a key made of mist. Learn from the woman in the iron lung who grew to love her breathing chamber. I could not live without it, she said. The monotony of embodiment, the monotony of boredom in human form. Monotony is the only force capable of destroying the world. Imagine the monotony of being the sun, with nothing left to do but shine all the time. I'm sure it never doubts, or it would immediately go out. The monotony of nothing, the monotony of all, the monotony of all or nothing at all in the repetitive reprieve of dawn. My heaven is doorless. It has no ceiling. I never tire of monotony. Tell me more, tell me more. Nails of the world, untie. You have nothing to lose but your umbilical shackles. The one irony of monotony is never as good as it gets, nor as bad as it seems.
The wonderful Bonnie Bowler has a little gift for you there as a way of saying thank you. How many of you knew that this was National Poetry Month? You also know it was National Library Week. Good time to read poetry in the library, right? So I think you're going to enjoy our next presenter. Karen Boyle is a senior at Capitol High and student member of the school district's Board of Trustees. He's the editor of the school's literary magazine, Pen and Ink. Next year, Karen will be going to Gonzaga. This world is in good hands. If you take a look at Karen's resume, you'll understand what I mean. So here to read one of his creations is Karen Boyle.
Thank you. Yeah, as Bruce said, my name is Kieran Boyle. I'm a senior at Capitol High. And today I'm actually going to be reading two poems. The first one is Amanda Gorman, the inaugural poet and youth poet laureate's poem, The Shallows, from her book, Call Us What We Carry, followed by an original poem which is based off of her poem. So the original poem that I wrote is actually written in the golden shovel form, which means that the last line, or the last word of each line, go together to make her poem. So see if you can pick that out. A lot easier for me to see it on the paper than for you to hear it. The Shallows. Touch deficient and light starved we were. Like an inverted flame, eating any warmth down to its studs. The deepest despair is ravenous. It takes and takes and takes, a stomach never satisfied. This is not hyperbole. All that is gorgeous and good and decent is no luxury, not when its void brings us to the wide wharf of war. Even as we stand stone still, it is with the entirety of what we've lost, sweeping through us like a ghost. What we have lived remains indecipherable, and yet we remain. And still we write, and so we write. Watch us move above the fog, like a promontory at dusk. Shall this leave us bitter or better? Grieve, then choose. And so we watch, a spectacle turned back upon us, forcing we to look, to act, to move, to think more, to write more, to pry above the floorboards of a nation, to hear the cries for help through the opaque fog. But the cries piercing the murk sound like change. The cries get clearer. They cheer, not a violent chant, a vehement non-violence peeping over the promontory, the last bit of light, of hope at dusk. Then suddenly it is dark. They tell us we shall not try, continue to cry, forget about all this. They tell us to leave, to go back to our countries, our closets. They call us slurs, words that taste bitter. They hurt, but we shall not retaliate or strike with violence. For peace hurts better than war. We shall strive to grieve death, suffering, and cruelty, but then we shall choose peace.
Thank you, Kieran. Amazing. Learn what a golden shovel poem was. I can't even grasp that concept, and you made a poem on it. Well, next up, we'll continue to be inspired by our young people. Aria Comstock is a 7th grader, a homeschool student, and is a member of the teen advisory group here at the library. Aria is another highly engaged young person, a poet and an artist, and she will share one of her original poems with us this evening. Aria Comstock.
Caching makes me happy. Caching makes me glad. Caching makes me joyful. Although I did not find, might be sad. Another geocache awaits you. You know. So off to a different geocache you must go. Through the mountains, through the woods. You might even have to pull up your hoods. Rain, snow, slush, sun. Geocaching is really fun.
And thank you for being a part of the group here at the library. Now, one of the important reasons we have folks like Kieran and Aria is our next speaker, Ryan Cooney. Brian teaches government, history, and world culture at Project for Alternative Learning, or PAL, here in Helena, and also at the Montana Digital Academy. Ryan's been recognized as an outstanding teacher for his passion and care for his students. And if you visit with Ryan this evening, ask him about his Honduran curly-haired tarantula, Teddy Roosevelt.
Teddy Roosevelt.
Welcome, Ryan Cooney.
Yes, Teddy Roosevelt is a dear family member of mine. And he has visited the classroom several times. He was supposed to live in my classroom, but I had students who would not come into the room. So Teddy's in my house, much to my wife's dismay. So, this is an honor. I'm not much of a poet, I never have been, but when I got the call from this sweetheart, I jumped on it right away. The library has been very important to me growing up here in Helena. I have many fond memories here with my mother and father and brother and sister. One of my most vivid memories here at the library was 6th grade. My teacher at Helena Middle School was Mrs. Hollow English. She was gone that day. We had a substitute teacher. And one of my buddies had, it was the 90s, so he had a remote control watch, digital watch. It was the fanciest technology at the time. And we harassed our substitute teacher that day by fast forwarding and rewinding a video that we were supposed to be watching. So we got caught, we got in trouble, and one of my assignments to make amends was to write a report about how remote controls work. And so I came to my local library, and I was able to log on the internet and do some research and get that report written. So this place has literally saved my hide, and I appreciate that. And then most recently, the Bookmobile has visited Project for Alternative Learning. One of my students discovered that the library has comics to offer, and that really excited him. And then I was able to bring my little boy, Edward Lee, here over spring break for a reading, and I plan to do much more of that over the summer. So thank you, Lewis and Clark County Library, and thank you for all of you for being here tonight. So as I said, I'm not much of a poet, never have been, but this is cool, and this has forced me to research poetry over the past couple of weeks. I went to my English teacher at PAL, Renee Dreesen, who's actually retiring this year, and I explained her this assignment, so she sent me home with several books to read through. And so after much research, I settled on the last best place, a Montana anthology. And I was able to read through a lot of poetry once more. And I settled on a woman who came to Montana from New England. Her name is Patricia Gedeke. And her poem, Lost, really touched my soul, actually. And I say that seriously. When I say I'm going to church, I'm going outside, I'm going to hike, I'm going to enjoy what we have here in Montana that is so important to me. And her poem, Lost, I think really encompassed that. And additionally, just the title, Lost. I think a lot of us might be feeling that in today's world with a lot of the craziness that we see in politics around the world in general, and just how easy it is to become disenchanted. But for me, I ground myself by reconnecting with nature. And so this poem kind of captured all of that for me. So once more, Lost by Patricia Gedeke. Lost. Miles from here, in the mountains, there is no sound but snowfall. The wind rubs itself against the trees, under its breath. If a crow calls, it is nothing. If a branch breaks, it is nothing. The birches look at themselves in the water. The long white poles of their bodies waver and bend a little, the yellow leaves of their hair. Like pieces of far-off stars come falling, hissing onto the lake. That is smooth as pewter. That is clear and tranquil as an eye. Lost up here in the mountains, as if someone had dropped it, but no. The pebbles beneath the surface have no nerves, they are calm. If a fish leaps, it is nothing, surrounded by moss and blueberries. Flowers breathe among the rocks, so quietly you forget everything. Up here on the crusty grass, the bushes sparkle with ice, and no footprints anywhere. If a twig snaps, it is nothing. For nothing matters once you have lost it. Down here in the valleys among the people, the sidewalks are full of holes, faint memories of far-off lakes. Up here in the mountains, in the great evergreen forests, if a woodchuck whirs, it is nothing. If a blue jay shrieks, it is nothing. Pine needles slip from the trees silently. They pile up on the ground.
bringing Edward Lee to the library and for leaving Teddy at home. Next, we want to welcome Bruce Day. Bruce is the Executive Director of Helena Food Share. Has anybody heard of Helena Food Share? I thought so. You know how important this organization is to our community, and Bruce has a long history of service, not only to Helena Food Share, but of nonprofit leadership and community service. He joined Helena Food Share in 2015, and today is leading a capital campaign to provide the organization and our community with an appropriate new home. Bruce will be reading from a selection from one of his favorite Montana writers, Bruce Day.
Thank you, and hi everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Indulge me just a little bit of a sidebar on my bio. I wanted to tell you, because it's contextual with my poem, that my wife Kathy and I have had the pleasure and the company of friendship and the friendship of 3 dogs, all Labradors over the year. The first, a chocolate called Coco, was a family dog. The second, a chocolate called Chella, was an empty nester's dog. And the third, a black lab called Luna, is our retirement dog. So as to the poem I chose to read tonight is by Jim Harrison, a favorite of mine, someone who I've come to appreciate in recent years. I think because of the insight he brings, writing from the perspective of the natural world and often through the eyes of the non-human animals that he knew. Harrison's poems can sometimes be dark and reflect or touch on turmoil. Not the poem I'm reading tonight, Man Dog. It's whimsical and fun, yet it speaks to the folly of a dog, speaks to the folly of the human condition, not through the eyes of a dog, but through the experience of man trying to be dog. Man Dog. I envied the dog lying in the yard, so I did it. But there was a pebble under my flank, so I got up and looked for the pebble, brushed it away, and lay back down. My dog thus far overlooked the pebble. I guess it's her thick lab fur. With my head downhill, the blood gorged me with ideas. Not good. Got up, turned around. Now I see hundreds of infinitesimal ants. I'm on an ant home. I get up and move 5 feet. The dog hasn't moved from her serene place. Now I'm rather too near a thicket where I saw a big black snake last week that might decide to join me. I moved near the actual dog this time, but she got up and went under the porch. She doesn't like it when I'm acting weird. I'm failing as a dog when my own kind rejects me, but doing better than when I envy birds. The creature least like us, and therefore utterly enviable. To be sure, I cheeped a lot, but didn't try to fly. We humans can take off, but are no good at landing.
Thank you, Bruce. Next up, we have another one of our great teachers from the Helena school system. Kelly Elder was the Montana Teacher of the Year in 2017. He's taught geography at Sierra Anderson Middle School for 19 years. Kelly is the president of the board of directors of the Marnoloi, and he travels internationally. And this summer, with a little bit of remorse, I tell you that Kelly will be departing for Montevideo, Uruguay, where he will teach at the Uruguayan International School. Kelly will share a piece that is significant meaning to him. Kelly Elder.
Did you get your answer, Karen?
Congratulations. Oh, was there an announcement?
No. I told my students earlier this week that I was going to be leaving, but I've known Kieran for a lot of years now. And, he is a fine example of the excellent students we have here in Helena. So he wanted to know tonight. I saw him tonight and he said, "So Mr. Elder, what are you doing next?" I said, "Just hang out a bit, hear about it." Wow. So many thoughts. Helena's been home for 19 years, but I also, came here in 1917. Get the bread a shop, then we can get on with living. 1976, I came to Helena from a place called Salinas, California. And I was born in Missoula. Grew up primarily here. Kind of ironic, some of you may know my brother Travis, also a Helena person. I've always felt kind of wrong because I was born in Missoula, and those who know Social Security numbers, mine is 569, etc. And that is a California Social Security number because we moved to California shortly after I was born. Travis was born in Salinas. And then we moved in 1976 to Helena, and he has a 516. He has a Montana Social Security number. So it's always kind of irked me that I'm the native Montanan with the California Social Security card, and vice versa. I bring up Salinas, California because I've really spent a lot of time this last year thinking about our sense of place in Montana, how important it is to me. Whether that's mountain biking, I whitewater kayak, I love Glacier Park. My favorite hike on the planet is actually in our Glacier Park here in Montana. The Fort Park cut across, and I like to stay at Sperry Chalet, and I love this state, and I always have. I also feel, though, I do love to travel, and I feel a need to go and see some more of this world while I can. The second favorite hike I'm going to mention real quick is in Argentina, which is right next to Uruguay in Patagonia. They also have a glacier park, and they're fairly offended when I suggest, anytime I bring it up to an Argentinian, they would be royally offended that somehow there was anything that could compare to theirs. And ours can and does. But I love their park. I love that part of the world, and I've actually never been to Uruguay. Although I do study Spanish, I think lifelong learning is important. And so since 2012, when I took a sabbatical and spent a few months in South America, I've been studying a couple hours Spanish a week. And I study with a teacher I met in Bariloche, Argentina. Argentinian Spanish actually is very close to Uruguayan Spanish, so I hope I'm going to be able to communicate in this new land. And I will tell you, for those who don't know, Uruguay is on the Atlantic coast. It's fresh water because the Rio de la Plata, the Silver River, flows out, and it's where the mixing is taking place between the Atlantic Ocean and the river. So I love rivers. That's important to me. Uruguay is not going to be known for mountains, mountain biking, whitewater kayaking. None of that's going to be happening. But I also love fine food. This is a city of 2 million people. In my interview, they said, "What are you going to do with yourself?" I said, "I don't know. There's 2 million people. There's got to be a lot of restaurants and some fine red wine. I'm going to be fine. Don't worry about me. I'll balance work and play." I mention that because I'm going to read an excerpt from John Steinbeck. John Steinbeck was born in Salinas, California as well. And so growing up, we'd go to the Steinbeck house, which was a library and then got converted into like a restaurant. So I'd have lunch at John Steinbeck's home. And I feel very close to him. He died a few months after I was born. That was in 1968, a while ago, Karen. But I did not know the man, but I feel very connected to him. And I think when John Steinbeck won the Nobel Prize in 1962, he was given that because he was an advocate of the poor, of the downtrodden. Specifically, the Nobel Prize folks said, for his realistic and imaginative writings, combining as they do sympathetic humor and keen social perception. And I think as a Montanan, as someone who loves this state, to be very frank, this legislative session and the events of the day today really have me wrestling with the pride that I have for this state. So with that, I'm going to try to share a little bit of John Steinbeck. He wrote a book called Travels with Charlie, in which he and his dog hopped in a truck and drove around the United States. And if you haven't enjoyed bits and pieces of this book, I certainly hope you will. For many in the audience, I'm sure you've heard this before, but I think as I look at transferring from mountains to sea to oceanside, you don't ever want to forget where you come from. And I just really hold a lot of this dear. And I'm not supposed to be getting choked up. I'm not even reading the damn thing. Okay. The next passage in my journey is a love affair. I am in love with Montana. For other states, I have admiration, respect, recognition, even some affection. But with Montana, it is love. And it's difficult to analyze love when you're in it. It seems to me that Montana is a great splash of grandeur. The scale is huge, but not overpowering. The land is rich with grass and color, and the mountains are the kind I would create if I were ever put on mountains on my agenda. Montana seems to me to be what a small boy would think Texas is like from hearing Texans. Here, for the first time, I heard a definite regional accent, unaffected by TVEs, a slow-paced, warm speech. It seemed to me that the frantic bustle of America was not in Montana. Its people did not seem afraid of shadows in a John Birch society sense. The calm of the mountains and the rolling grasslands had got into the inhabitants. It seemed to me that the towns were places to live in rather than nervous hives. People had time to pause in their occupations to undertake the passing art of neighborliness. I found I did not rush through the towns to get them over with. But I see that, as usual, love is inarticulate. Montana has a spell on me. It is grandeur and warmth. If Montana had a seacoast, or if I could live away from the sea, I would instantly move there and petition for admission. Of all the states, it is my favorite and my love. Thank you.
McCall Flynn is next, and she's the Executive Director of the Montana Board of Public Education. So you know what McCall's been up to for the last 4 months. Shenaniconda native and a Carroll grad. McCall served in the administration of Governor Steve Bullock for 8 years, and in a sense, she still serves Governor Bullock down at Brothers Tavern. She's one fine bingo caller, I'll tell you. McCall is going to share with you tonight a selection that is one of my personal favorites. McCall Flynn.
Thank you so much, Bruce. We do joke that none of us ever stop working for Steve Bullock, so I suppose that still reigns true. I chose Jabberwocky, so I'm going to be reading Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. I chose it because it's the first poem that I remember memorizing as a middle schooler, probably closer to Aria's age. And it was really challenging for me as a middle schooler. I think my linear brain had a hard time with the whimsical writing and the kind of gibberish that this poem really presents. And so I hope that I can do my middle school self-justice and do better today than I probably did then. So Jabberwocky by Lewis Carroll. 'Twas brillig in the slithy toves did gyre and gimble in the wave. All mimsy were the barrow groves, and the mome grass outgrave. Beware the jabberwock, my son, the jaws that bite, the claws that catch. Beware the jub-jub bird, and shun the frumious bandersnatch. He took his vorpal sword in hand, long time the maxim foe he sought. So rested he by the tum-tum tree, and stood a while in thought. And as an uffish thought he stood, the Jabberwock with eyes of flame came whiffling through the tulgey wood, and burbled as it came. 1, 2, 1, 2, and through, the vorpal blade went snicker-snack. He left it dead, and with his head he came galumphing back. And hast thou slain the Jabberwock? Come to my arms, my beamish boy. O frabjous day, callooh, callay, he chortled in his joy. 'Twas brillig in the slithy toes, did gyre and gimble in the wave. All nimsy were the barrow groves, and the mown grass out great.
Thank you, McCall. It is indeed a frabjous day. Next, Mary Irish Johnson. Mary's been in Helena for 20 years and feels right at home. She's a longtime member of the Montana Native Plant Society and volunteers for many activities involving the natural world, wildflower walks, public presentations, school activities, and so on. Mary is also active with the Helena League of Women Voters and is very involved in the library. She'll be reading from a poet we may all recognize. Mary.
And I have to say something about Bonnie too, because Bonnie helped me so much with another poem that I was wanting to read. And then I went to Louisiana and things changed and I switched gears. So, I'm going to read I Saw in Louisiana a Live Oak Growing by Walt Whitman. But first, I want to tell you why I picked this poem, and then I'm also going to talk a little bit about Walt Whitman, and then read my poem. So a few weeks ago, I went to New Orleans, and I was captivated by the city and also by the trees there. And I want to know how many of you have been to New Orleans? Oh my gosh, okay, great. Well, that was my first trip. And the trees there are in the they were from the 1700s. They're huge. We walked along the city, and there were many kinds of trees, but the oak trees were very special. They would be over several blocks, several roads. They had, when we walked, the vestiges of Mardi Gras beads were hanging from some of them. And they also had a little bit of ivy growing up them. But then, and also in the sidewalks, the roots are just coming out of the sidewalks on the side, or the sidewalks go around the roots. So they were very special. But then when we went into the parks, the trees were solitary and alone. And there was large Spanish moss hanging down from them. And when the breeze blew, the Spanish moss would go back and forth. So it was very special time. And then when we were there, I remembered that my mother had made an embroidery here, and it was hanging in my home of this very poem. And my mom took embroidery very seriously. She went to the Royal School of Needlework in London and made many embroideries. So this is one of them, and I hope afterwards when they're mingling around you can come and look at them. So anyway, a little bit about Walt Whitman. I knew very little about him, and I'll read just a little bit. The second of 8 children born to barely literate, financially unstable parents, Walt Whitman was a grammar school dropout who learned to love language while setting type for Brooklyn's booming print industry. The signal event of my life up to that time, he wrote in his memoir, was gaining access to the Brooklyn Apprentices Library, the city's first free circulating library. So he loved the library, and then when he was 16 years old and the library was 10 years old, he became acting librarian of that library, and it had 1,200 volumes at that time. He also led a book group there, and people would come and discuss books. And I learned that in 1946, the Brooklyn Library was renamed the Walt Whitman Library. In Louisiana, he was there for 3 months. He came at the age of 27, and he was the editor of the New Orleans Crescent. He loved the atmosphere, the bustling docks, the vibrant mix of different kinds of people, the food, the drink, and I think all of you who were there, have been there, probably can, can relate to all that. He was horrified by the slave auctions, however, and he did write quite a bit about the slaves later. 3 months later, he returned to the North, and he was inspired to begin Leaves of Grass, which was his volumes of many poems. The poem that I'm going to read, he wrote in 1858, just before the Civil War started. And in the Civil War, he was a nurse. He visited soldiers in hospitals for many years, and he died in 1892. He wasn't well appreciated in his lifetime, but now he's considered one of the great American poets. He's also called the father of free verse. No rhymes or meters, and it just allows for more emotional expression. So he was, his great subject was America, and now I'm going to read this poem. I saw in Louisiana a live oak growing. All alone stood it, and the moss hung down from the branches. Without any companion, it grew there, uttering joyous leaves of dark green. And its look, rude, unbending, lusty, made me think of myself. But I wondered how it could utter joyous leaves, standing alone there without its friend near, for I knew I could not. And I broke off a twig with a certain number of leaves upon it, and twined around it a little moss, and brought it away, and I have placed it in sight in my room. It is not needed to remind me as of my own dear friends, for I believe lately I think of little else than of them. Yet it remains to me a curious token. It makes me think of manly love. For all that, and though the live oak listens there in Louisiana, solitary in a wide flat space, uttering joyous leaves all of its life without a friend, a lover near, I know very well I could not.
How many of you are familiar with the Montana Historical Society? If you didn't raise your hand, you will be. Molly Krukenberg is the director of the Montana Historical Society. Her long interest in history began growing up on a farm that had been in the family for 7 generations. She received a graduate degree in library science that led her to a 20-plus year career at the Historical Society. She became director in 2020 and is leading the agency through a remarkable expansion. Molly's going to share a couple of pieces that she's selected with us tonight.
Thanks, Bruce. I have 3 poems that I want to share this evening. A few months ago, the Historical Society released a documentary called Hidden Stories about the Black history of Montana. These 3 pieces were written by local poet Sean Hill and speak to the Black history of Montana. So I'll read these 3 for you. The first is called Clarissa Lands. Long ago, way before the story involving you, water found the easy way through this landscape. The only way it knew, collected where gravity guided, wending ever down, gathered trickles to an eventual river, what came to be called the Missouri. And then the wars waning, you traveled up that water by measures to the territory of Montana, a land of fresh starts. And one day in May, perhaps feeling the first moments of no longer being property of a man and his wife, a woman who you look so much like you could be her younger, duskier sister, and probably are, You disembarked the Lily Martin to freedom, this after the Confederacy surrendered, marking the end of a peculiar misery for you and millions of your fellow folk. The other end of a long journey begun with so many embarkations, the Middle Passage. So many decisions brought you this far, to this sublime land where you step into the new light of freedom, not even a teen, and have to lean on the promise of reconstruction as the shadows of black codes and Jim Crow grow like a river rising in spring melt. Old notions and new abuses of those who look like you. Yet, in this heart-stretching land, you'll meet a young man, James, and y'all will lay claim to a new life and create a legacy. The second poem is titled Pearl and Lee. Pearl Payne and Lee Pleasant Driver, two of the few Negroes in Anaconda, a smelter town, found each other. Lee, the protected side of something, sheltered and sheltering, a pleasant place out of the wind and rain. A pearl rose from the need to soothe pain. Nacre encases irritants to smooth rough edges and results in a luster we appreciate, worthy of the necks of our adored if we can afford it. Smelting, extracting the metal from rock or ore, copper in this case, valued because it carries a current and connects people, requires heat and care. Lee Pleasant, a former Buffalo soldier, saw worth in Pearl Payne, and she in him. He, born at the end of the war, and she, a dozen years later, who didn't know slavery, but knew well what it meant to be black in a newly reconciled nation, wed in that western smelter town. The final poem is called Alice Looks. You, born in Anaconda, a copper smelting town, you, born to the drivers, Lee Pleasant and Pearl, you, born where two creeks join to birth the Clark Fork, you, born in 1917, amid a swirl of happenings, the Great War winding down, rain going elsewhere, a pandemic waiting in the wings, were closer to copper-colored than whites, your neighbors. The world kept swirling as your parents raised you, and 6 siblings on a ranch outside of town. You went to school and studied. The KKK, some of your neighbors, studied hate, attempted to whip it up against Jews, Catholics, blacks, and you, both black and a devout Catholic, would be doubly despised. You devoured your studies and went on to Montana Tech and became an X-ray tech in Butte. You could look inside folks to see what was busted or inflamed.
Thank you, Molly. Next up is Abby Shea. Abby is a bookseller by trade, sharing her passion with her customers at the Montana Book Company in downtown Helena. She was born in Miles City, grew up in Twin Bridges, and studied at Carroll College. She enjoys connecting customers with the stories that connect them with the possibilities and provide escape. Abby will be sharing pieces meaningful to her with us tonight. Welcome, Abby Shea.
Hi everyone. I'm real nervous. I'm going last. Okay, so since being added to tonight's list of readers, I have been thinking a lot about the intersection between the library and the bookstore, and between librarians and booksellers. We all know what an ISBN number is, have developed a quirkily specific method of alphabetizing and a set of jaunty nicknames for all of the regulars, and can easily rattle off the most commonly banned books. Speaking of banned books, I further went on to think about some of the more unusual things that Helena's bookstore, which those of you who have been there may already know is a bit unique, and our wonderful Lewis and Clark Library, between myself as a bookseller and the librarians and staff, that we are very, very lucky to have running this facility. And I've been thinking about what we have in common, the weird things and the wonderful, and why the library might have asked someone from Montana Book Company, other than our mutual love of storytelling, to come down and read and talk about poetry. We all know what it is like to provide a desperately needed safe space for the most vulnerable people in our community. I'm really glad that Mr. Elder already cried, because I'm gonna. We believe that no story should go untold, and we understand the importance of diverse representation when it comes to connecting readers with the kind of stories in which they might be lost, or, even better, be found. And we spend a larger than average amount of time with Helena's young readers. Maybe have even been lucky enough to have one or two of them trust us and share themselves with us. These kids, guys, they are magic. They are so funny and weird and smart and silly and interesting and talented and shy and awkward, and sometimes they talk nonstop, and sometimes we can't get them to talk at all until suddenly they're just like shouting something strange at you or making a weird punny dad joke. And I'm sure you've guessed by now that a lot of them are queer. And the reason that they let us in on all of that mess, that they come in and go lump around in every kind of weird shoe you can imagine, and ask for hugs, and make those punny jokes, and pass me and my coworkers wonderful secret notes, hopeful, grateful little musings. I had a kid come into the bookstore and hand me a note that said, "Montana Book Company saved my life." And that young man shared with us some of their experience of their family and community not confirming his gender identity and not accepting them as a member of their family. And to know that we are providing space for that human to feel loved and like they belong is a deep honor. And the reason that they do that with us is because we're a place that says, "Come in, you are loved." We're a place that will try like the Dickens to get their pronouns right every single time, even when it changes every other day. And it's allowed to change, y'all, okay? I'm profoundly grateful that they let me truly see them in all of their silly, slimy, strange, messy, majestic becoming, and in their uninhibited joy. And I thought, what better way to celebrate all of that complicated wonderfulness and the joy and hope that they bring me every day by reading a poem that speaks specifically to them. And that is why the title of my poem is missing on tonight's program. not because it doesn't exist, but because at first I selected a poem that was an evocative love letter to that becoming, to living in the fullness of youth and possibility. I think I'll read that poem now. I'll do that one first. This poem was featured in Transcendent Joy, which is a zine published by and for Montana's LGBTQ community and Two-Spirit community. It's produced in cooperation with Forward Montana. This one is from edition 2. It was written by a human named Ash Walker. It's called Trans, as in my gender transcends. Singularity won't wear one-dimensional anymore. Can't hold on to me in your language. Trans because I'm always in transition, holding eternity in my molecules. They, as in bigger than everyone. Bigger than me. Them, as in every polarity holding me together. I am the sun in love with the moon. I am the air that holds your cheek. I am sunlight on water. I am quantum potential, existing through time, held in place all my life by fear. Hold me still in your sheet, afraid of my other. Do you see the power in my other now? Call me she, and you are not wrong. Woman was never wrong for me, but you show me who you see. The tip of an iceberg. Call me she, and miss out on the expanse. I am the ocean in a drop. I am trans, I am visible, and I am madly in love with my multitudes. So I think you might know where I'm going with this, and some of you, hopefully all of you, will indulge me if I read a second poem, because obviously I was picked one and then stuff happened. The reason I couldn't commit to just one and answer Patty's damn email about what poem I was going to read is that I felt compelled by what has been happening in the legislature of a state that I thought was a live and let live state. I thought was a state that had space for everyone to breathe and to be. The things that have been happening in this legislature are horrific, and I think once you hear me read the next poem, you'll understand why it needed reading and why it needed reading today. But before I read it, I just want to provide you with a few statistics, some pertinent data provided for you via me from the Trevor Project. Okay. Suicide is the leading cause of death among young people 10 to 24. Queer youth are more than 4 times as likely to attempt suicide than their peers. The Trevor Project estimates that in the US alone, more than 1.8 million LGBTQ and Two-Spirit youth seriously consider suicide each year. And at least one attempts suicide every 45 seconds. The Trevor Project's 2022 survey on LGBTQ youth mental health found that 45% of queer youth seriously considered attempting suicide last year, including more than half of transgender and non-binary youth. Across race, ethnicity, Native Indigenous youth who are Two-Spirit or LGBTQ identifying consistently report the highest suicide risk, with research finding that they are 2.5 times more likely to attempt. LGBTQ and Two-Spirit youth are not inherently prone to suicide risk because of their sexual orientation or identity, but rather are placed at higher risk because of how they are mistreated and stigmatized in our society. The Republican majority in Montana's legislature has been focused on one thing this session: pushing more than a dozen anti-trans bills. And unfortunately, most of those bills have passed. This week, they censured the 100 district's legally elected representative, Zoe Zephyr, a trans woman, for speaking with, as she put it beautifully, clarity and precision about the harm these bills cause. Today, the Montana House of Representatives voted along party lines, and Zephyr was banned from the House floor, effectively stripping her of the ability to represent her 11,000 constituents in debate for the remainder of the legislative session. Okay, I think you're ready for the other poem. This is Now Tell Me You're Afraid by Misha P. This poem was featured in the first edition of Transcendent Joy, which I might add came out in 2020. Now, tell me you're afraid. Tell me why you're afraid, and why I'm the one to blame. Separate souls, flesh and bone, yet expected to fit a frame. You are afraid of change. I am afraid of pain. You're terrified of people unified, an upheaval of your system of hate. I am petrified with my eyes held wide, viewing control at a quickening pace. You are horrified of boundary shifting. I'm horrified of mandated skirt lifting. You fear a change in competition, and I fear I'm being forced out. You undeservedly have a decision, but I'm expected to shut my mouth. I just want to be seen and heard, but you insist I'm ignorable, like some sort of force to be stopped, when in reality, your actions are deplorable. Now, tell me that you're afraid of change, when I know what's really at stake. Because I have always been here, and I always will be, for I am here to stay.
Wow. Thank you, Eddie. Thank you, Molly. Thank you, Mary. Thank you, Carl, Kelly, Bruce, Ryan, Aria, Kieran, and Bill. Thank you to all of our readers tonight.